Good evening, everyone. It is great to be speaking to you this evening. My name is Josh. I'm one of your clergy, if we've not met, and it's great to be speaking to you tonight, carrying on our common sermon series on fasting. We're going to be speaking tonight about fasting, stand with the poor. And over the last few weeks, we've been digging into this kind of forgotten practice of the church, fasting, looking at this discipleship tool, which the church has kind of practiced since the very beginning, and what it could mean for us here in Bristol, in St. Nick's, and what the Lord might be prompting us to recover. I don't know about you, but over the last 3 weeks, I've been really kind of challenged and convicted, but also encouraged and excited by what I've been hearing. And for me, that's usually a pretty good indication that the Lord is like doing something in me that's significant. So I'm really excited for us to press into this together and to see what God might have for us, what fasting could mean for us as a community. And I know exactly what you're thinking. Is this not the guy who talks about barbecues every single time he gets on this stage? I mean, I've heard him talk about briskets during a talk on grief. You know, like, I hear you, I'm well aware. And obviously, as we talk about fasting, there are complicated dynamics. We, as people, as God's people, we are called to the feast and to the fast. And maybe like me, you've wildly overemphasized the feast and neglected the fast. But also there'll be some of us in here tonight for whom the idea of abstaining from food is a really bad idea for all kinds of reasons. And we'd really strongly suggest that you don't do it. We don't want to encourage you to do something that would be unhealthy for you. In fact, we would love to support you and love you in that struggle and bring you alongside other people who are fighting that fight too. And if you want to know more about Taste Life, which is how we do that, then chat to one of your pastors, your home group leader, etc. But whatever it might look like for us, though, we believe that God has something to say to each of us about this practice. And whether we intend to give it a go or whether we're going to apply this learning from this series to other areas of our discipleship, there is something for each of us to glean. Toby kicked us off a few weeks ago, introing the discipline and opening up for us how when we fast, we are offering ourselves to God. This, it's not a weird diet or some way of buying God's attention for when we pray, but a way of offering our souls, our bodies, our time to God in prayer and proclaiming the outrageous truth that He is the one who sustains us. He is all we need. And then Maddie carried on last week looking at how in fasting we grow in holiness. That when we take and create that space for God to speak to us, as we lean on Him and His presence, He shapes us more and more into the people He's calling us to be, transforming us from the inside out. And today we're going to go even further and look at how fasting has the power not only to transform ourselves and form us internally to be more like Jesus, but how the practice can actually form and shape churches, communities, and even our city. We speak often about playing our part in the transformation of society. And today we're going to look together at what fasting has to say about that. To do that, we're going to look at one of the Bible's most powerful passages, which talks about fasting, found in Isaiah 58, 6-9. So grab your Bible. If you want one, there are tons stacked up here, or it's going to come up on the screen, and we'll read along with this passage together. Isaiah 58, 6-9 says this. Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and to break every yoke. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood. Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here I am. So bear with me here, right? Because statistics are not my jam in the slightest. Maths and geography people, you can come and see me afterwards, and I'll pray for you. But as I see it, current estimates are that there are 8 billion people on the planet. And out of those 8 billion people, 2.33 billion people face severe food security problems. To bring that to the UK, in the latest research we've got in the UK, which is from 2023, it is that 7.2 million people live in food insecurity in the UK, which the Department of Work and Pensions classifies as not being able to sustain a normal pattern of being able to eat 3 times a day. That is 11% of the population. That's more than 1 in 10, 3 or 4 kids in every classroom. And to bring that to our city, Bristol's only got stats around this for under 18s, but the under 18 rate is that 8% of children within our city are in severe food poverty. And then there's another stat for you. While 11% of the population are in food insecurity, let's call that hunger, while 11% of the population live in hunger, 10.7 million tons of food are thrown away in the UK every year. 60% of which, the largest share by far, being household waste. So I did some much ropier maths at this point, and I got a bit tied up in a few too many equations. But basically, I think, transpired that the amount of food that was thrown away was more than 8 times the amount that would be required to feed the 11% of people facing food insecurity. So it's fair to say that we live in a society where many don't have enough to eat, and where others of us have so much access to food that we're throwing tons of it away. If we believe in a God of abundance who made enough and provides enough, then there's something deeply wrong with that equation, right? Is there a practice from the way of Jesus that stands against this disparity? Yeah, fasting. So what does our passage have to say to us? For context, God is speaking to his people here through the prophet Isaiah around the 7th or 8th century. The prophets were these individuals that God filled with his spirit to take his words to his people. And Isaiah, the prophet, he's sent to speak to the people of Israel, the people that God has chosen and intended to be what he calls a kingdom of priests, a channel or example of what God's kingdom would look like. A city on a hill, a holy enclave, showing the world what it looks like to live God's way, and subsequently, as part of that world, to bless the rest of the world. So Isaiah is sent to speak to these people, and these are people who that is the intention, right, for God's people, and yet they are constantly falling short and failing, especially around the area of justice, socioeconomic justice, and what it looks like to care for the poor. Prophet after prophet is sent to speak to the people about their abuse of the poor, their exploitation of the vulnerable, and their lack of care for those in poverty. And to the God who self-titles himself the God of the widow and the orphan, classic examples in the context of those who would be forgotten societally or really struggling or be impoverished. The God who describes himself as the God of the widow and orphan, the God of the oppressed, the God of the poor, for him that is a huge problem. And he has mandated a care of these people. And his people are continually failing to live up to it. And it is in this context that Isaiah speaks these words. Is this not the kind of fasting that I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and to break every yoke. Is it not to share your food with the hungry, to provide shelter for the poor wanderer, and when you see the naked, to clothe them, to not turn away from your own flesh and blood? Interestingly, Isaiah directly links care for the poor and the sharing of wealth, or what we could call privilege in our context, with a move of God, with the breaking in of his kingdom, and with prayer and an experience of God's presence. That's interesting, right? The passage says, then when you've taken care of the poor, then will your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing quickly appear. Your healing. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here am I. This is a whole other dimension to what we have looked at in relation to fasting so far, right? It is less about what it does for us internally and our relationship with God, and more about how it transforms the world around us. And I believe that occurs in three ways, and that they are that when we fast for social transformation, we are fasting as proximity, as provision, and as prophetic declaration. There you go. They all even start with P. You're welcome. So what do I mean by fasting as proximity? Well, fasting isn't just about self-denial. It's about standing in solidarity with those who suffer from hunger, injustice, and poverty. If I'm honest, outside of choosing to fast, I'm privileged enough to have never been hungry. I don't know what it is for you, but that is, if I'm honest, if I don't choose to be hungry, I won't be hungry. That's the reality of my life. In choosing to fast, we choose to experience what the poor and the marginalized experience in order that we might understand their suffering, be brought into proximity and understanding of their life, and burn with a passion for change and increase our compassion for them. When we fast, we're reminded of how much we depend on food and comfort, and this can lead to a deeper understanding of the daily struggles faced by those in poverty. Fasting is to stand in solidarity with the hungry, to choose to experience what they experience without choice. You stand in solidarity with and begin to understand something of the experience of those millions around the world, in our nation and in our city, who go hungry not by choice. The denial of our stomachs does something to our heart. We can easily fall into this trap, right, that all transformation comes through our mind. But God's made us with bodies, beautiful and complex. And Jesus bestows the ultimate honor and dignity upon that body by becoming one himself. You are a deeply embodied person. And therefore, could it be that some transformation in our discipleship does not come through the mind, through a book, through an amazing sermon, through a podcast, but that some transformation God brings through our bodies? Could it be that our compassion for the poor and our drive to face injustice will not merely grow through understanding in our minds, but through some deep experience of the body where we stand in solidarity with the hungry by becoming hungry ourselves? One of the main times that I experienced this in my life was a few years ago when I did a placement with a chaplaincy team in a prison. And I had been pretty used to kind of ministry context with people who'd done kind of organized crime or crimes that are kind of born out of poverty and desperation. But this prison contained men who'd done a kind of crime that I wouldn't say I understood in the slightest, and basically contained, without getting too into it, the worst kind of criminals in our society. And these are the guys that, have been painted as monsters, done monstrous things. And I ended up in this environment where I was kind of trying to minister to these people in this chaplaincy context. And it was one of the most tiring things that I have ever experienced. Because half of my mind at any given moment was saying that the person before me, the inmates in this prison, you're a child of God. You're made in God's image. You deserve dignity. You deserve safety. You deserve a second chance. And the other half of my mind was saying, I have spent a lot of time with people who are victims from the kind of thing that you've done, and I kind of want to kill you. You know, it was an exhausting experience because my mind bounced from that to that continually, and I found myself really drained. And it was so hard to, like, build compassion. And then a funny thing happened. The first was, it sounds really trivial, but obviously when you go into prison, you're not allowed to take your phone in with you. And as a very phone-addicted millennial, like us all, and you Gen Zers have no hope, I found myself constantly twitching for my phone and finding my pocket empty. You know, it was like I was in a Western movie. I was always like, oh, there's nothing there. And feeling like the anxiety of that. And I was thinking one time when I was in there how ridiculous that is. And then I thought, oh, man, it must be so boring being in here. Like, I know it sounds really trivial, but I just had this sudden thought of, like, what on earth happens? It's an interesting day, you know, face-to-face with lots of people, and then I go home and you get shut in a box for 12 hours with nothing. Like, I don't know if I could survive that. Like, it must be so boring. And then I felt my compassion kind of start to grow of, like, a bit of understanding of what that experience was through experiencing a small part of it. And then the bigger one was my wife and I were at the supermarket, and we were at the tills, and Hannah said to me, oh, have you got your wallet? And I reached to find out that I didn't have my wallet, and because I just got used to, like, having nothing in my pockets. I'd forgotten my wallet. And I said to Hannah, no, sorry, I haven't. That's one of the really weird things about being in prison, getting used to having nothing in your pockets. And I literally watched everyone who was in earshot of us go. And this woman who was, like, at the till next to ours put her arm around her child and, like, stepped like this to, like, pull their child away. The old lady who was in front of us at the till, I watched her knuckles go white as she clenched her purse with, like, all the force she could muster. And it was really weird, because in one way it's really ridiculous, but I felt this, like, this corporate shame, like, start to grow in me as everyone around me started to treat me like I was a criminal. And, you know, I'm not. I've not done anything wrong. And still I felt this, like, growing sense of shame. And I just was hit by this realization. Oh, my word. What must this be like if that shame has a true root for you to experience this for the rest of your life? To have to say it in a job interview. To have to say it to every person for every person you knew before you went to prison, to know when you meet them that that's where you've been. And I suddenly felt my compassion, having tasted, like, the minusculest bit of the experience of these people, my compassion really start to grow for these men through experiencing a little bit of what they experience. Standing with the poor in solidarity and sharing their experience does something to your heart. You know, you begin to see the hungry not as an unknown face in an unknown neighborhood and an object of your pity, but as a face, a name, a neighbor, a co-child of God, and as family, a family for whom you're responsible. And it builds your compassion. It does something to your heart. When we fast, we stand in proximity with the hungry and invite God to build our compassion. When we fast, we do so in proximity. Secondly, when we fast, we do so as provision. It's not just our heart and our compassion that we're opening up to God for transformation, but our actions. 1 John 3:16-18 says this. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. And we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need and has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. We love with our actions. The early church, in its hand-to-mouth context, would live this call out by partaking in a fast day in order that the food they would have eaten that day could be given to the poor. You know, today, I'll take the hunger so that you don't have to. Sharing the privilege. I have enough, you don't have enough. Today, you have enough, and I'll go without. What is more cross-shaped than that? The shepherd of Hamas this early church document from the 2nd century containing instructions on discipleship, before we had YouTube tutorials or John Mark Comer's podcast. There's this book that contains these instructions, and this is what it says when it's talking about the 2 days a week that the early church would classically have fasted on, from sun up till sundown. These are usually Wednesdays or Fridays, and it says this: estimate the cost of the food that you would have eaten that day, and give that amount to the widow or the orphan or to someone in need. Be humble in this way, that the one who receives something because of your humility may fill his soul and pray to the Lord for you. Note how powerfully dignity giving that is to the recipient. They're not the helpless recipient of a handout here. They can bless you in your humility through the power of their prayer. And I love as well, note the subtle suggestion. How challenging is this? The subtle suggestion that the one who has little is more likely to pray powerfully than the one who has much. And once again, church practice directly linking care for the poor with prayer. St. Gregory of Nyssa said, give to the hungry what you deny your own appetite. It sounds simple, right? And it kind of is. The transformation doesn't happen by us understanding some complex thing with our minds, but following a simple challenge with our bodies. And I know it can be so easy to think, what can one person do in the face of all this societal injustice? Those stats that I said at the start are huge, right? It's so fair to be like, what can one person do in the face of that? What difference can one person make? You can fast as provision. You can fast and you can give the tenner that you would have spent on your lunch to the food hub, or the hour that you would have spent cooking dinner, or the 3 hours if you chop things as slowly as I do, to go and buy a coffee for someone who's struggling and chat to them about life. Share some of your privilege with them. I mean, we can hook you up with all manner of mentoring organizations that we partner with. Give that time to bless them. Share the privilege that life has given you with them. I was so encouraged this week to hear a story about 2 people in our congregation who they give up an hour a week to look after this lady, this single mom's 2 kids, so that she can go to get mental health support. That is life-changingly transformational for her. They're just giving up an hour of their week. But how beautiful is that? 1 hour. When we fast, we stand with the poor, and we do it as provision. We fast in proximity, we fast as provision, and finally we fast as prophetic declaration. Now, I don't know about you, but I'll confess that when I look at the state of injustice facing us in Bristol, facing us in the UK, and globally, I could probably pretty easily offer you a list of the people that I think are to blame. They wear blue ties, they went to Eton. Just kidding. Half kidding. But in my more discipled moments, I think 2 things happen. The first is that I realized that it should always start with me. Not who I can blame, but what I can do, what I can change, what I can bring. And 2, I remember that there is something deeper at work in the sheer scale of injustice in the world than the little list of politicians or corporations that I don't like. Paul puts it way better than I can like this: for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, the authorities, the powers of this dark world, and the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. The enemy of the God of justice loves injustice. There is a spiritual battle going on that seeks to erode proximity and breed hostility and enmity between us, to build on misunderstanding and keep us as strangers. There is a spiritual battle going on in the constant drumbeat messaging to attain more, climb more, be more, gather more, keep more, eat more, buy more. The noise is constant and endless. There is a spiritual battle going on in the whisper that you don't have enough. That when you have that next thing, that is when you'll be happy. That is when you will thrive. To fast is to stand up to and against that backing track. To fast is to prophetically declare that I have enough. God has given me all I need. I have resources to spare. I have things to share. There is a good God, a God of abundance, who provides for his children. He will provide for me, and he'll provide for others through me. I have resources to spare and things to share. When we fast, we stand in direct contradiction to the lie that we need more, and prophetically declare that in Jesus' name, we have all we need to live life and life in all its fullness. When we fast, we stand with the poor in proximity, undergoing a taste of the suffering of many that we might call them brother and sister. We fast as provision, sharing what we abstain with those in need. And finally, we stand as a prophetic declaration against the false gods of accumulation. Should we stand, and we're going to pray, and we're going to ask God what he has to say to us this evening and where he might be stretching us.